Hello, everyone. We continue on the program with US-Japan relations viewed from America. Today, we go to Wall Street. As you know, Wall Street is the center of finance in the world, where many banks, stock brokerage firms, and other financial institutions are located, including the very famous New York Stock Exchange. And first, we have three very brief interviews with people just passing by on the Wall Street. And after the interview, Ms. Virginia LoCastro and myself will have very brief discussion. Virginia, are you ready?
Yes. Good to be here.
Okay, so let us imagine we are on the street corner of Wall Street.
Hi, tell me your name and what you do here at Wall Street.
My name is Rob Fields. I'm a commercial leasing broker in real estate.
What do you think of the trade imbalance between America and Japan?
I don't think it should be a problem. If America was more competitive, we wouldn't have the problems that we do with Japan. Personally, I think that if Japan can produce better and cheaper products, they should be allowed to import whatever they want, and it should be the problem of American business to solve it, not government.
What do you think that the American government should be doing?
I think we should be concentrating more on our own production and worry less about what Japan is doing and compete with them head on.
So do you feel that a good relationship with Japan is very important?
I think a relationship would be important because obviously Japan is becoming more of a major player in terms of real estate and products that they're producing, and it wouldn't hurt to help to alienate them. But by imposing trade restrictions and whatnot, I think it's just alienating the Japanese here.
How do you feel about the, well, some call it the invasion of the Japanese in the real estate market here?
Well, it's sort of a problem because the Japanese people have longer times to wait for the yields that they need, whereas Americans are much more short-term. So it's really hard to compete, but I don't have a problem with that because as long as they're bringing the money in, and they're prudent businessmen, so it's good for them and makes just us become more on our toes.
Well, in Japan, Japanese businessmen spend a lot of time at work, sometimes even more than 16 hours, and they have very little time for friends and family. How about yourself? What's your daily life like?
Well, I have a high regard for my leisure time, and when it's time for work, I work, but actually I work to enjoy my leisure time as opposed to just work for itself. So it's hard to compete with the Japanese for that reason. They're working so much of the time and concentrating so hard on that, it's very difficult for us, and especially with the American mentality, which is, what's the company going to do for me as opposed to what can I do for the company? So we're sort of at opposing ends.
So, for example, how many hours do you work in a day?
I probably work 10 hours a day, but my job is never done because I'm always working, even during the social times, finding out what's going on. So as opposed to a 9-to-5 job, Americans in general, I don't think work as hard as the Japanese, and that doesn't help us.
Do you have a family?
No, I don't. I'm single. So, what?
So are you happy with the way things are going? You like your job? Do you feel that it's not too taxing on you?
No, my job's not too taxing on me. I think that's what I like about it. But it's very competitive. And real estate being the way it is, I spend more and more time working. But it gives me the money to fully enjoy my leisure time. So that's what I like about it.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Take care.
Thank you. Hi, could you tell me your name and what you do here at Wall Street?
I'm a reporter for the New York Stock Exchange. My name is Pedro Martinez.
How do you feel about the trade imbalance between Japan and America?
I don't have much to say about it. I don't have much to say about it. I mean, the market is so very slow now. And it's not much work, not much volume.
Do you feel that it's important for America to have a strong relationship with Japan?
Yeah. A lot of things are made from Japan. That's in New York, in the States. Not only, stock, but clothing, toys, other things.
Do you see a lot of trade going on for Japanese companies on the stock exchange?
No. I don't know of any.
So what's your daily life like? What do you do every day there?
Oh, I just work with a broker, which is called a specialist, and he gives me sales to put inside the machine and go across on a ticker tape. That's all I do all day.
How many hours do you work?
I work from 9:30 to 4.
So you have a lot of time to see your friends and family?
No.
No?
Not working down here. We only get a 20-minute break and a half-hour lunch, and that's it. So it's not much time doing it. It's just back and forth from the floor down your stairs to your break and back on the floor. That's it.
Well, thanks very much.
Okay.
Hi, tell me what your names are and what you do here at Wall Street.
My name is Peggy Heinz. I work for Payne Weber as an analyst.
I'm Bill Bogart. I work for Payne Weber, and I'm a methods analyst.
How do you both feel about the trade imbalance between Japan and America?
I feel it's very strong, and I think they're a great asset to us financially.
I think it's a trade imbalance that we're aware of, and I think our government is dealing with it one way or the other. It's handled by our Secretary of State and our people in Washington, and it's being dealt with where we are, aware of the fact that there is a large trade imbalance.
How do you think that it should be dealt with? Can you see something that America or Japan should do to improve the relationship?
Well, that's something I leave to our elected officials in Washington. That's not a call I make on my own.
Do you have any opinions about that?
No, sorry.
So do you feel that it's important for America to have a strong relationship with Japan?
Go ahead, Becky.
No, go ahead.
Most assuredly, yes. And as much as they're a very dominant factor in our country right now, you can see this. It's very evident in the marketplace down here. We saw evidence of that on October 19th.
Well, that's a very interesting interview, Sunday.
Yes.
Yeah, it's stopping people walking on the street like that and, you know, just thrust the microphone and ask difficult questions,
Right.
like trade imbalance with Japan.
Right.
It wouldn't be easy to answer in a coherent way.
No, I don't think so. No. But it's
Ah.
commonly done in New York or in the
Mm.
United States in general, I think. Yeah.
And if you consider that, it's really remarkable that particularly the first businessman did a very good job in responding in a reasonable way.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Where these last two people didn't seem to really want to talk about it.
Yeah, that last one was a little bit strange.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the first gentleman who said he was a real estate broker and he looks like one with those leather jacket, he said that he didn't think that trade imbalance with Japan was a problem. And he was rather generous, more or less favorable to Japan. He did
Right.
not blame Japan. He was rather blaming the Americans for not working hard enough to compete with Japan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Do you think that's a common attitude?
I'm not sure if it's common, and in certain parts of the United States, for example in Hawaii, people are afraid that the same thing will happen there that has happened in Tokyo recently, where the land prices and real estate costs have gone sky high. So I don't think he necessarily represents the point of view of a majority of Americans.
But he seems to have a fair knowledge of Japan and the Japanese business.
Yes, yes, he seemed to be aware of what's going on, for sure.
And it's interesting the way that he contrasts Americans and the Japanese in their attitude toward work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, he said that he feels that most Japanese work, 16 hours a day, whereas that's very uncommon in the States, and that's probably a correct opinion. Correct.
So he said that he feels it is difficult for Americans to compete with Japanese because Japanese work so hard while Americans work, but they more or less work for enjoyment.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Not work for work itself.
Right. They work to have free time and money to do things during their free time. I think that's the general attitude of most Americans all over the world.
That was an interesting interview. What do you think about the second interview with a black woman?
Yeah. She's, I think, just a clerk on the stock exchange. And apparently what she does, she said she's a reporter for the New York Stock Exchange. Apparently that means she takes the figures that her boss gives her and she just types them in, just almost like a key punch operator.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably why she only works 9:30 to 4 every day, because that's rather difficult or debilitating work. And she would make a lot of mistakes after a while if she kept working too many hours a day.
But even she had a fair answer to the question about Japan. So that's Japan is now such a big subject. So even people like her who normally is not much interested in that kind of thing can say something about that, about the relation with Japan. That is remarkable.
Yes.
The third interview with a couple was also interesting. The lady didn't seem to be much interested in.
Yes, although perhaps the interviewer could have put the microphone closer to her a couple of times, but it did seem that...
Sort of made her uncomfortable.
It could be, yeah.
What do you think about the language that the man used?
He seemed to be speaking in what I might call public information language. He wasn't talking about his personal opinions.
I see. Now we move on to the office in the New York Stock Exchange and have an interview with Mr. Roger Kubarych, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Economist.
One of the issues that came up early on in the American presidential campaign, back when the caucuses were held in Iowa and the New Hampshire primary, were the relationships, you know, on the economic front between the United States and Japan. And do you see in the next couple of years a big change that will occur in the relationship between the two countries economically?
Yes, I think a lot of the tension that has been apparent lately will diminish. It'll get smaller. And the reason is that there's been such a big change in the value of the yen relative to the dollar that that will have set in motion very long-term changes that over a period of time are going to relax those tensions. They're going to change the relative incentives and disincentives for companies to do business in the two countries.
Why do you think it took so long for the exchange rate to change? You know, the dollar was strong for so long in relationship to the yen, and now it's reversed. Why did it take so long?
Well, you really have to ask foreign investors, including Japanese investors, why they were so eager to buy U.S. assets. I think there's no one single reason why they did. Obviously, they thought that they were getting good value, and they were buying those financial assets, like U.S. government bonds, partly because they felt that they were going to get a higher yield than if they bought Japanese government bonds or other Japanese securities. Over time, that provided a lot of strength for the dollar against the yen. So even though our trade position with respect to Japan was worsening, our capital position with respect to Japan was improving. And the net impact was to make the dollar very high. And that, of course, made life even tougher for U.S. industry trying to compete with Japanese firms. So the real source of the pressure on the trade side are those very economic incentives that made for large-scale inflows of capital from countries like Japan.
And the inflows are decreasing now? Are
The
Japanese
inflows
and
over the period of time when the dollar started to decline, particularly in 1986 and 1987, there was a big drop in the inflows of funds from abroad. They were replaced by official operations by official agencies like the Bank of Japan or Germany's Bundesbank, which is their equivalent of the Bank of Japan.
So private investors stopped or
But
slowed
private
down?
investors held back to a very considerable extent in their buying of bonds. Through it all, however, foreign investors bought a lot of stock, U.S. U.S. equity. They also continued to buy a lot of U.S. real estate. So even though we saw a big drop in the purchases of U.S. bonds, we saw a sustained increase in the purchases of other U.S. assets, particularly stocks and real estate.
Yeah, it's almost, when you look at the paper, you see a lot of companies being bought, as well as, you know, real estate, say, in New York City. But what impact will that have, you know, in the future with Japanese and other foreigners owning so many more things here?
Well, the big impact of greater foreign investment in companies and actual production facilities, as well as in equity, The big impact of that will be to transplant Japanese corporate management into the United States. And you will have a transfer of production facilities under the management of Japanese companies. So just like in the 1950s and the 1960s, U.S. multinational companies went to Europe, to Belgium, to Germany, to Britain, throughout Europe, and set up subsidiaries to produce in Europe, but nevertheless American products. Now you will have Japanese companies producing Japanese designed products using American capital and labor.
So if we have now Japanese managed companies in the United States producing Japanese designed products with maybe Japanese production methods, who will buy these then? Just the Americans, or will they go elsewhere as well?
Well, they certainly will sell into the United States, and to a certain extent that will displace exports that would have come from Japan. But in addition, they'll sell throughout the world, including back to Japan. And they'll make that calculation on the same basis that American companies operating worldwide make that calculation, namely on the basis of where's the best and most profitable place to produce. So Japanese companies will become as multinational in their orientation, in their outlook, as American companies are.
And what about politics? Does politics intervene to a great extent, or do you think some of these other conditions are more powerful in influencing the course of events?
Well, politics can play a role. Certainly, there are certain policy measures that can do great damage, and there are other policy measures that can make the process of adjustment smoother and less painful. So politics matters, but I consider it a less than not the most powerful dynamic. Relative economic incentives, prices, profitability, those are much more powerful forces for economic change than most policies.
Yeah, so that's like politics intervening in the economic system in a way.
That's right. Politics intervened by a number of small measures that did raise some obstacles to imports. However, they were not binding constraints. They did not keep imports out entirely. All they did really was to slow the growth and taper off the expansion of penetration of foreign products into the United States. So they have to be viewed in a context. In other words, this was a very mild form of import barrier compared to the much more drastic forms which would be much harder for the rest of the world to tolerate.
Are there things we can do to make the world tolerate lower tariffs, you know, in general?
Well, tariffs are not really the issue.
Yeah.
Through a process of negotiation over the last 30 years, tariffs have been brought down virtually everywhere. And at the moment, there are only a very few industries in which tariffs play a significant role as import barriers. The real problem are what are called non-tariff barriers, quantitative restrictions of various sorts that either by law or by custom keep out good value products from a country. And Japan has an enormous array of these non-tariff barriers in all kinds of industries, and we have some ourselves.
What are a couple that we have and a couple that the Japanese have?
Well, one of the most obvious non-tariff barriers that we have is in the area of military products, where there are certain Defense Department specifications that make it virtually impossible for some foreign companies to participate for military products.
I see. So they can't bid on a contract because
that's right, because of certain specifications. And this is an area in which many countries' defense departments have these kinds of restrictions, but since ours is large, we're committing a large proportion of our total GNP, our total output, to defense compared to, for example, Japan, then they are a source of non-tariff barriers.
And in Japan, what are some of the ones?
Well, there are various quotas on virtually everything in agriculture, almost anything having to do with consumer products, and you know, the list is endless.
Well, that person was Mr. Kubarych, who is the senior vice president and the chief economist for the New York Stock Exchange. That means he is in a very high position in the financial world.
Right.
So the mood of the interview was quite different from the ones that we saw before with those people on the street.
Yeah, right.
What impression did you have with Mr. Kubarych and the way he talks?
I think earlier you said that he was actually an economist by profession.
I
rather
think
than
he is,
Mhm.
yeah.
And
Not quite a he's a businessman, all right, but
Right.
not really the typical American businessman. He's more of a researcher, I guess.
Yeah. My impression was that he could be an academic teaching at a university with his tie slightly askew. Not the smooth businessman type by any means, but obviously a very capable man, right? Extremely capable.
Yeah. At the outset, he said that as a result of the big change in the exchange rate between the dollars and the yen, certainly we saw a very dramatic change, rise in the value of the yen and the fall in the dollars. And he said, as a result, they have the change in the relative incentives and disincentives in the way they do business in Japan and the United States. Would you paraphrase that?
Okay, I think what he means is that previously it was more financially interesting for Japanese to produce here and to export to the United States. But because of the change in the dollar-yen rate, now it's actually expensive in the States, or it's becoming increasingly expensive to have Japanese imported goods. So it's more useful and more financially interesting for Japanese companies to go to the States and to manufacture goods there. And then those goods can be bought by Americans at a price that's still acceptable.
Rather than exporting finished goods to the United States.
Right, right.
That will have a favorable impact upon our trade relations.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
That's why he says that some of the tension will diminish between the two countries.
Yes, yes, right.
Mr. Kubarych seems to be a strong free economy advocate. No?
Yeah.
Mr. Fans Roda, in the interviewer, talk about lots of Japanese businessmen and others going into the U.S., buying up real estate, buying up stocks, buying up companies, which could cause some alarm on the Americans. But this guy, Kubarych, is taking that in a rather matter-of-fact way.
Right.
Didn't you have that impression?
Yes, yes, and I don't know what his personal opinions are, but at least from the professional point of view, he's trying to be neutral and just presenting the economist's point of view.
Do you think that is the attitude on the part of the average, I would say, Americans?
Probably the average American, like, for example, the woman, Pedro Martinez, that they interviewed. They know a little bit, but they don't know enough to go into those details. And so a lot of Americans, I think, as I said, the last program, I think, are fairly neutral or positive. The few that are negative are, I think, tend to be located in certain areas of the States where the industries have been hurt by the competition with Japanese companies. That's my impression.
I see. So he is not quite typical in that respect.
No.
But he is very confident, I think, about the U.S. economy, which can compete with the Japanese if they are given the equal opportunity. I think that's how more or less he feels about that.
Yes. And perhaps it's true that with more positive thinking and more confidence, then good things will happen. If everyone's always talking about how bad Americans are as workers, maybe that makes people just become even worse as workers.
He also belittles the impact of politics.
Yes.
And he gives greater emphasis upon the force of the economic forces, economic factors like prices and so forth.
Yes, and I'm wondering if most people would agree with him. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, again, I think he is sort of free marketer. I think typical free market advocate. And also towards the end, he said that they have an enormous array of non-tariff barriers in Japan, which is not quite true. So I think he is rather excessively harsh on Japanese.
Yes.
Don't you think?
Yes, at that point I thought he was. And I think many people, including himself, are ignoring some of the cultural differences. For example, that American farmers say that Japan should import American rice, but I don't think they realize that rice is a very special commodity in Japan, connected with religion and with the culture that goes back for centuries. So by saying Japan should import American rice, I think Americans are touching on a very sticky point there.
So you think he is a little bit prejudiced?
Or he doesn't have enough knowledge. That's what I would like to say.
Well, that was a sort of interesting interview with rather high-level U.S. businessman, and I hope that you will enjoy that together with sort of different kind of interviews we had with the people on the street. So the next week we will have the continuation with the interview with Mr. Kubarych and also interview with another person.